Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder when I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, greetings listeners. I am walking home from the optometrist with glasses on, which so far is just kind of weird. I imagine I'll get used to it pretty fast, but it's going to take a little getting used to, I think. So, if I sound distracted a little bit while I'm talking, that's because I am distracted with vision. No, my vision really wasn't that bad, but apparently it was bad enough. So in this episode of Pick Up and Deliver, I would like to talk a little bit about something that's come up in a couple different channels, and regular listener Chris Graves asked me about it, so I thought I would talk here a little bit about the discussion about civility. I find this interesting. Chris brought it up in the context of two recent videos. The first is Rodney Smith's video about people being unnecessarily mean. And basically what he says is it's something he's seen more than once on social media, where somebody has a new game that they've bought and they put a picture up and say, just got home from the game store, really excited to try it. Any tips or advice? And somebody will reply something like, yeah, throw it in the trash. It's a terrible game. And Rodney comments on that. Basically what he says is, why would you say something like that? Why would you go out of your way to say something like that? It's one thing if the person is thinking about buying a game. Hey, I'm thinking about buying this game. What do you think? They're asking for your opinion in anticipation of possibly buying the game. But if they are actively buying the game, if they have bought the game already and they're excited, then commenting with something like that isn't helpful. And Rodney's point is, what is the point of doing that? And he laments the fact that people are not very nice and unnecessarily not very nice. Yeah. So that's kind of what Rodney, and he's just mad that people do this. And he says there's no point to doing it. It sours the water, it poisons the community, and it's just not helpful. In a related note, Rado has introduced a code of conduct for his YouTube channel. And he sort of says, in essence, the code of conduct is be nice, be respectful, be polite, don't be dismissive. And basically what he says is, if you're not, I'm just going to delete your comments. And he's not willing to engage with people who aren't willing to be civil and nice. And apparently this has really raised some level of uproar. I did see a couple people in the Board Game Geek channel, in the YouTube, the Board Game Geek conversation about Rado's channel, complaining a bit about what he said or what he decided. And I find this to be an interesting space as well. I don't see anything particularly wrong with it. And Rado lays out his argument. His essentially idea is that the YouTube channel is kind of like a party he's holding in his backyard. And he doesn't want someone in his backyard who's saying rude things or being rude to the other guests. And he's treating his channel the same way. You're welcome to say whatever you want in your backyard or in the public square, but his YouTube channel is his backyard, and you're not welcome if you can't be polite. And I think this is a perfectly reasonable approach to take. It is, of course, the approach the law takes. The idea is, if you have a space that you have created or that has been given to you, in the case of something like YouTube, where Google owns it, but they give individuals the control over the space, you get to decide what behavior is acceptable there. On one hand, I'm sort of nonplussed that this is a question at all. There are people who get persnickety about it in ways that I find amusing and strange. I recognize the worry about cutting all critique, but I think we have allowed the internet to become a place where critique is unreasonably and unnecessarily and all too often vicious for no reason. And so any attempt to keep people civil and honest and forthright and welcoming is all the better, in my opinion. For my experience, I help run a board game group called Toggle Gaming. We play online games every Tuesday. We used to meet in person every Tuesday, and we expect that we will again sometime, although we really don't want to start meeting again until we get to the point where we don't even have to ask about vaccines, where the situation has moved us to the point where we're expecting enough people to be vaccinated that it's not really a concern, because Toggle is a place of welcoming and generally not a place of exclusion. And like if we hold our events and we say you have to be vaccinated to come, that means people who can't be vaccinated can't come. And really the only people we don't tolerate at Toggle are the intolerant. And so to hold an event that's structured around one of those other factors is, I think, not within the spirit of what we try to do. So when somebody, like we have occasionally considered doing events that cost extra money, and we try really hard not to do that because some people are working on very tight budgets and can't really afford to spend much at all. So they come to our events because, in part, they're free. And we don't really like when people have to pay to come. That's part of our ethos. You never have to pay to come to Toggle. But we have a code of conduct. We wrote it several years ago when we, in view of some recent events and sort of thinking about what kind of group did we want to be, that is built around a lot of the same things that Rado used when he was talking about his code of conduct. And I think fits his basic dictum: be nice, be polite, be generous with others, treat each other as you'd like to be treated, all of those things. And somewhere along the line, people on the internet decided that that shouldn't be the rule. Or a loud minority on the internet decided that shouldn't be a rule, in part because the internet is a mostly anonymous community as compared to the other kinds of things we're talking about, platforms we're talking about. I guess I don't know how much more I have to say about that, except maybe to say the one counterpoint, or the one element that I think we need to keep in mind, is we can't use a call for politeness as an excuse to avoid critique. There have been in the past moderate folks who have good intentions, who want civility over progress. This was most famously explained by Dr. Martin Luther King in his letter from Birmingham jail, in which he calls to task the religious leaders of the Birmingham area, particularly white religious leaders, who claim to have Christian values, but say this isn't the right time for aggressive action. Slow progress needs to be made, blah, blah, blah. And King, I think quite rightly and very eloquently, points out that that's what they've been saying since slavery was abolished. And the only time progress is made is when people actively argue for it. The people in power don't give out power voluntarily. And so to suggest that people should wait for their redemption is problematic. So what does this have to do with codes of conduct and calls to be nice? If, and I certainly have not seen this happen in the board game community, and I don't expect it would, given that we have a significant number of people who are pretty actively thinking about these things. But if the calls for civility came to be a tool used by the greater community to prevent the speaking out of, the calling out of injustice, that's a problem, right? That when something unjust is happening, the need to be polite can't be the epitome of the solution. So while it's important to maintain codes of conduct and civil behavior, it's really important also to think very carefully about how to keep the community open to conversation and accountable for their action. Because I would worry with too much push towards civility that someone less thoughtful than Rado might find themselves pushing back against any critique. And then you run into the other problem of problems going unspoken, and usually people in power covering up unpleasantness that occurs to people not in power. So that would be the one caveat I have. But generally, the calling out of an experience, the sharing of an experience in a reasonable way, won't be the sort of thing that Rado would be banning. And frankly, even if Rado suddenly becomes completely anti-criticism, and anyone who ever says anything critical of him gets banned from his space, ultimately I think that's the way it should be if he wants it to be. I think the only way that people making content can work, the only way that a shared space like YouTube can work, is if everybody is able to make things and feel safe. And you can't make things and feel safe if you are being hounded and harassed. And so even if the hounding and harassing ends up being just in your own space, I think you get to say no thank you. Get out of here. There's nothing keeping other people from talking. As much as Rado is asking people to be nice, he's asking people to be nice in his place. He doesn't want people to show up in the Rado Runs Through video comments and get called slurs. He can't control what people do outside of those spaces, and so I don't think he wants to try. Now, I don't know what that means in terms of I don't know how to parse that into something a little bit more friendly. Hopefully what Chris was asking has been answered here. I think if you haven't seen the Rodney video about this or the Rado Code of Conduct, feel free, please do go look those up. I will try to put links to them in the show notes. Perhaps one last thought about this could broach the question of moderation on Board Game Geek. I have seen a number of people in the last year complaining about how the moderators on Board Game Geek have been handling the community. It's an interesting conundrum because I think that all in all, the moderators on Board Game Geek do an excellent job. And they have a very difficult task because we have sometimes a very unruly group. And they have to decide, how do we know which things should or shouldn't be used? And the two main filters they seem to use are dismissive and off topic. I think those ones are pretty interesting because often when people have something nasty to say, they are saying it dismissively and not on topic. And so I think when they use dismissive and off topic as ways to govern what's going on in different forums, I think that's a pretty solid choice. And I appreciate the Board Game Geek moderators for doing that work, especially because it's difficult and not always fun. Certainly not very thanked. I don't know if I want to say it's thankless, but the level of complaint that I hear about or read about it does suggest that it's not, the people aren't especially thankful for it. What are your thoughts on this issue, dear listener? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269, the Pick Up and Deliver Guild. Look for the thread on frequently asked questions and episode titles where Chris asked this question. Thank you for asking it, Chris. And weigh in. Let me know what you think. How do you feel about codes of conduct? What do you think about systems of evaluation and systems of moderation? What do you think about all of these issues? I want to hear your thoughts. You can share them over on Board Game Geek in the forum I just mentioned. You could also share them by email, brendan@rattleboxgames.com, or you could share them by direct message on Board Game Geek. My username is wombat929. You could also share them with me via the chat on asynchronous board game platforms, Boitaju, Board Game Arena, or yukata.de. In all three places, I am Wombat929, and I would love to play a game with you. Well, thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Take care. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.